share essentially how you came to be doing what you're doing.
From the age of 21, so for 34 odd years, I've battled anxiety, which started at the age of 21 after an event coming back from overseas. And then that over a period of time, it got a whole lot worse. While I was working as a trader for different banks, deep down, even though on the outside I appeared very on top of things, underneath I was getting more and more unhappy. During the last 10 years of being a trader, my anxiety then moved to a severe case of burnout. The burnout then, left untreated for a long period of time, led to depression, and that depression in turn led to basically overnight the end of my career.
Have you ever noticed signs of burnout and anxiety and just ignored them? Pushing mental health issues to the side only makes the problem worse. You need to confront the issue head on. Today I'm speaking to Nick Gorman about his chronic struggles with burnout and anxiety and the turning point that finally led to him confronting his mental health struggles. Welcome to Move Your Mind, where we uncover why you are holding yourself back from getting the life you want and what to do about it. With the help from high-achieving guests and experts in behavioural science, personal development, and the health and wellness space. Join us if you're ready to move out of your own way toward your ideal self. I'm your host, Nick Brax, and I've been working in the health and wellness space for the last 15 years, helping people find direction and gain the courage to take control of their life. My mission is simple: to help you learn everything that I wish I knew so you can become your ideal self. Lacking guidance, I spent the majority of my youth feeling lost and disempowered, which led to depression, anxiety, low self-esteem, and substance abuse. Looking back, I didn't have the vocabulary to communicate what I was experiencing. And as a man, I didn't resonate with the emotional language used in traditional therapy. I didn't need to talk about my feelings. I needed tangible solutions to guide me toward building a life I was proud of. If you can relate, then this podcast is for you. In this episode, we discuss how you can confront issues such as anxiety and burnout head on. If you're ready to take action and build a stronger mindset, then keep listening.
Nick, so nice to meet you, mate, and thank you for coming on the podcast.
It's a pleasure and great to be here. Thanks, Nick.
No, I appreciate it. And I shouldn't have said nice to meet you. Nice to meet you again, because we actually had a chat last week, and as often happens when, I guess being like-minded and hearing about your story, we talked about so many things that probably would have been good to be recorded on it that I'm sure we'll bring up today. And you've got such an interesting story. So yeah, super excited to dive into all of that.
Cool.
So we might just start by, asking you if you can share your story, what you're doing now, and essentially how you came to be doing what you're doing.
Yeah, so it's starting, my background was in financial markets. I worked for maybe 22, 23 years as a trader in financial markets. And now I'm in my mid-50s, and clearly my life has taken a pretty radical shift. But just to give you some backdrop of that, coming up from Melbourne to Sydney, following my dream, all that I'd studied for, the dealing room floor is all I wanted to do. And that's exactly where I got to I was living my dream. And then I spent a long time in, what I'd describe as a pretty combative environment. But deep down I loved it. I had a lot of different responsibilities. And then, as a fairly young guy, I was, given management opportunities, and as I said, it's all I wanted to do. I worked damn hard, and, but in reality, deep down is that I'd always had some struggles around my mental health. Giving you a very short backstory, but, from the age of 21, so for 34 odd years, I've battled anxiety, which started at the age of 21 after an event coming back from overseas. And then that over a period of time, it got a whole lot worse. So while I was working as a trader for different banks, deep down, even though on the outside I appeared very, on top of things and etc., but underneath I was getting more and more unhappy. What I've since learnt, Nick, is that during the last 10 years of being a trader, is that my anxiety then moved to severe case of burnout. The burnout then left untreated for a long period of time, led to depression. And that depression in turn led to basically overnight the end of my career. And so in 2017, I walked away from that career that I'd wanted to do all my life, basically overnight. The silver lining is it allowed me to set up my business now, which is called Equilibrium at Work. It was set up in 2019, and my primary, part of that business is mentoring coaching. I mentor and coach people that were basically like me, working in corporate, not having many outlets with regard, outside of their social infrastructure and employment infrastructure. I thought that, by setting up a business and by giving people the opportunity to come and speak one-on-one in a really safe, confidential space with someone that had lived experience in corporate and mental health, then I thought there'd be a huge opportunity. And so I spent a long time doing due diligence, and I ended up setting up my business, and here I am today, and thankfully it's going great.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, mate. And there's so many different things to talk about within that story, and I think it's it's a funny thing, the full circle sort of moment that can happen where you've had anxiety for what you're saying there 30 odd years and bottled it up, and then finally dealing with it, and having all of this then give you the tools and the motivation and the knowledge to go and do what you're doing now and give back. And it probably couldn't have happened any other way, but I think it's such an important thing that you're talking about. I mean, that's a really tough thing to be hiding that for that long and just pushing yourself forward and pushing through it. And I'm surprised you didn't get burnt out earlier, because it's such a heavy burden to carry, and so many people, especially men, are holding on to these different things, sometimes never getting the help that they need. And we need to talk about it. So I guess what was the turning point for you? You're saying was that you just hit that point where you were burnt out and you had to make the change, I guess.
Yeah, and I think it's really important for me to highlight something. And it wasn't necessary. A lot of people, they've read stuff recently around my burnout and the trading room and all this sort of stuff. In reality, it didn't necessarily mean where I was. That job was the vehicle, really. Everyone suffers potentially from burnout. It's just that was my world, and I loved it. But in reality, it was, was it, a good backdrop to my struggles? Probably not. But maybe a lot of other careers would have been exactly the same. I think that's really important. But the turning point for me was, I was asked this recently in a presentation, was around that. When did you know? When did you know enough was enough? That moment where that switch. And Nick, it's so clear that it was on the dealing room at Citigroup, my last place of employment. And I was sitting in a very familiar setting, and there was a bunch of my friends who were traders. They were laughing at a joke, and I just couldn't laugh. I couldn't raise a smile. It was so poignant, to the extent where I took a deep breath, and I went home and I said to my wife, Sarah, I think I'm a lot sicker than I thought I was. And I think I need to make some real changes to get better. And the next day I walked in and in a very, emotional state, and I resigned. So basically in a matter of 24 hours, it was like that trigger. So that was my moment. And it was so clear that I'm a pretty outgoing, I'm generally pretty happy, but it was that I probably had been suppressing it. I know I had been suppressing it for so long, but I just knew that I was much more, I was sicker than I thought I was, and had to make some changes.
Yeah, exactly. And we don't, and like you're saying, not to do with necessarily the environment you're in, it's to do with that you just didn't know what was going on, and you didn't know how to get the help or where you should go. Like so many of us don't know. I went through the same thing where until I was suffering for so long till I hit breaking point, and then I finally got help, and then it really showed me, when I saw how many people go through the same thing. So we need to learn and educate other people how we can actually have these conversations, because I think it's just not talked about enough.
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. It just, I look back on everything's so clear in hindsight, isn't it? But I look back and just realize, and I can see very clearly now through my work just how many are like me, how many that
Yeah.
held back and didn't know what to do about it. And, the mere fact that I'm sitting here talking to you and we're doing very similar things, it shows that, stigmas are lifting, the whole thing is changing, and that's a wonderful thing.
Absolutely. So, with the anxiety side of things, what have been some of the things on a personal level that have helped you to deal with anxiety and to manage that?
Do you know what? Now I sort of have to roll it into one with
Yeah.
the depression and anxiety. And as we both know, so many people, that you suffer from both of them more often than not. But the thing around anxiety is pretty tricky because for years, the key here is that I was undiagnosed for literally 30 years. So I really didn't have a hat to hang on something to say, hey, Nick, this is what's wrong with you. This is what you can go and research it. We're going to treat it. And it didn't matter how many practitioners I saw, no one could really put their finger on it when I was going through the anxiety. So the anxiety was all around backpacking overseas, not looking after myself as a 21-year-old. So many Australians go and do it. And there was a fundamental change, a shift in me that something went wrong as a result of me not looking after myself. And that set up 3 decades of the anxiety. And all sorts of different things, social occasions. I've now been diagnosed with social anxiety, and sort of counterintuitive because, I love social occasions, but often when I had no gas, put me in a social setting, I was really exposed to having either a panic attack, fight or flight. Some of the, people that actually say, oh, anxiety, everyone gets anxious, right? Yeah, they do. But in reality, those that suffer from anxiety, you've got to be in it to know how bad it can be. I've been lying on a floor of an aeroplane having a panic attack. I've had to leave courses, all sorts of, it can be debilitating, as we know, right? So I now, after having dealt with it for so long, I see signs, I know now that, okay, I know I'm in deficit. I know the potential for anxiety attacks coming. I've got to act. I've got to do something. So I've become so, it's so familiar to me.
Yeah.
And I don't know about yourself, but it will be with me for the rest of my life. I'll just deal with it differently.
So many good points in that, and exactly 100%. I think that's such an important message when it comes to mental health, anxiety. Well, everything you said there, I think, is important messages, but it's so closely linked with depression, and they all overlap each other. But it's not the kind of thing where we can just get better and get to a point where we're controlling it, we're managing it, and then we're just okay. You got to. It's like anything. We've got to be on, doing things daily to look after ourselves and to make sure we're on top of these things, because if you leave it, it can snowball again. And that's the exact same for me. Anxiety's probably been the thing that I've suffered from the most. And you become more aware of it. You start to learn what works for you, what doesn't work. And as you see it coming on, you know that if you can catch it then and there and do something to mitigate it, you'll be able to probably, stop it from becoming, this big storm. Whereas if you let it just pile up, it can lead to a panic attack and, different things like that. So I think that's so important what you're saying there about that.
You know what? I'm interested in your thoughts, but it's like the poor cousin to depression, isn't it? We talk, bipolar and depression, and then like, I've got anxiety. Okay, great. But,
exactly.
And I often say this to people. I say, whenever someone expresses that and they tell you that they're battling anxiety, you've got to be far more empathetic. You have to have a level of understanding that it can be just as bad as anything else out there.
I think it can almost be worse, like you're saying there, because people will dismiss it, saying, oh, well, we all go through anxiety, life's stressful, you got to just push forward. And unless you're feeling that debilitating feeling that happens, like, it is paralyzing. And I've had it in a way where, I haven't been able to get out of bed for days. It doesn't leave you. It stops you from, you get paralyzed literally by it. And obviously, when you're in that situation, you more than anyone want it to stop. So hearing someone just tell you, you got to just be stronger. You got to push through. You got to get through it. It makes it only worse. So it is that empathy thing. I think people that haven't been through it simply don't have that understanding of what it actually feels like. And we can't judge these things. I think it's a really dangerous thing when we start. And I think this is a thing that happens with men a lot of the time, why they don't get help, because we can often think, well, other people are suffering more, and that's going to be selfish of me or weak or embarrassing who am I to talk about what I'm going through when there's all of these other issues going on and people that are suffering more. But we can't compare these things.
No, you can't. It's like that idea of the unfortunate guy with one leg on the other side of the road. It's like that. But I should be, of course I'm okay compared to that. But it's kind of a fruitless exercise, because that's not fair on anybody, really. And do you mind if I ask you? So for me, diagnosis around that and depression was the most liberating thing, because I could go and do something about it. Did you feel the same when you were diagnosed?
I did, absolutely. And even with probably the biggest one, I got diagnosed only 2 years ago with ADHD. And that helped dramatically, because the anxiety thing I was aware of and I'd found things that helped. But being able to realize, okay, I actually have ADHD, and it's explaining, a lot of them are from a lot of the issues I've had are from other things as well, but a lot of my behavior patterns, how my mind works, it was such a relief to realize, okay, this is a thing this is why my mind works this way. And it can be really frustrating, because, I saw so many therapists, and I was literally sitting there saying, hey, look, I don't want to, I'm in this area. I've talked about this 100 times. I've seen 30 different therapists. I don't need any more information about this side of it. I just want to know, can you help me find out why this is happening? What can I practically do? Do I have OCD? Do I have this? And most of the time they just wouldn't give me an answer. And it was I just wanted to know what the hell is going on, something more practical.
Yeah, I was exactly the same.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And so that must have been just such a relief when you found out that okay, this is what's going on.
Yeah. I'm my beautiful psychiatrist who very sadly passed away. This beautiful man, he was the one. He had probably the experience, and he diagnosed me with mild depression and social anxiety there and then, and treated it. And it was like, okay, well, I'm like, it was like this, hallelujah, great, all right, let's go. And it's like someone saying, you got diabetes, well, also I go and do something about it. It was that I was the same as you. I saw and have seen psychs and psychologists for years, and was never properly treated. And I'm not blaming that, right? It's more the fact of the connection I had with my psychiatrist recently. He just knew. He thought I'd be better knowing what was going on, and his best, in his most experienced point of view was that, and he was right. He was right what it was. So it was hugely liberating.
Hey guys, if you're enjoying this podcast, please click the subscribe button, leave a like or comment, share with your friends, and follow me on Instagram at Nick Brax. I really appreciate your ongoing support.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. And it's like anything. It's, like if you need glasses or you need whatever it is, this isn't a big deal. We all have physical issues. We all have mental health related issues. It's more just, the worst possible thing is to just not know what to do and to be going through the same thing over and over again. It makes you go crazy. They say the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and getting the same result. And that's what you feel like. And then you try and do different things and you feel helpless, and then that chips away at your self-esteem, and then you feel more helpless. And it's just this spiral where you end up just having no confidence left, because you're thinking, well, what the hell's wrong with me? I'm trying. I'm exhausted. I don't want to even try anymore because I've seen all these therapists. I'm trying all these things, and you almost want to just give up. And I think it's, again, why it's so important that we, have these conversations, because there actually is something people can do, and people need to hear that, and they need to know what they can actually do when they, are in these states.
Exactly right.
So I found it interesting earlier what you were talking about, where you were saying when you were traveling, you had this incident happen that, you had the fear of traveling beforehand, you had this event happen that reinforced the fear, which then led to anxiety. How big of a role did that play in your, the future depression and anxiety problems that you had? Because I think we often don't realize why we actually respond to certain things, but it can, a lot of the time it's come from some sort of event that happened when we were younger, and that's developed into this complex that we just don't get rid of. And it's so much of it's in our head that we don't realize.
Yeah. So again, I mean, with regard to that trip, I went backpacking totally, balanced, no issues. And as a result of not looking after myself over a sustained period of time, basically, young guy, partying hard, not sleeping, eating badly, I basically came home and I had what would you describe as a mini breakdown when I got back to Australia. And that led then to what the hell is going on here? And I didn't realize that something, with my physiology had changed. There'd been a reset, and I couldn't cope. And that was the beginning. And that I was searching for different, what is it? Am I anxious? I'm getting uncomfortable here. I've never felt like this before. And so something physically changed in me, Nick, during that time of not looking after, myself. And now I work with a stack of clients around this. They're not backpackers. They're working professionals. And that idea of, I'm like, it's the same concept, let's avoid the rabbit holes. I didn't avoid the rabbit holes. I had no one to say to me, hey, maybe this is going on with you, or, maybe I didn't have a practitioner to help me, so I was flying blind. But, that set up so many issues for me over a much longer period that it should have. Only because, again, I didn't know what was going on. Yeah.
It's education. I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? We don't get taught about this. We don't get taught often by our parents. We don't get taught in school. So how the hell are we meant to, we're flying blind, and we're going to make mistakes. We're going to have things happen. How are you meant to know how to deal with it if you don't have that information? It's crazy.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So in the work that you're now doing, what are some of the main issues that come up, and some of the core things that you're helping your clients work on?
So the two, sort of give you a bit of a context, is that a lot of my business is the one-on-one coaching, the mentoring, and then the other part is speaking to large groups around burnout, better work-life balance, what to avoid, what to look for, etc. So within the, I'm fortunate enough to have just gone over 900 coaching sessions, which is just, to me, is kind of bizarre from where it's come from, and it shows you the need. And what I find is that there are threads right through very similar things, topics that come up time and time again. I've got this body of work now, and if I was to, summarize or give you the main things that are on front of with regard to people's concerns, firstly is around work-life balance. Knowing that it's out of whack, not feeling great, what to do about it. So I put techniques in place, or help them put techniques in place around, clearly trying to avoid the potholes. This is what's happening. It's clear to me this is what's going on with you. You need to get some assets in your life to deal with the stressors, right? Number one, really. Second thing, a lot around imposter syndrome in a professional environment. Unfortunately, a lot for women, it's disproportionate. That idea of not good enough, confidence level is shattered. I've been promoted beyond my ability. that's real. That people are, I mean, anyone who says they don't suffer from imposter syndrome, I think's lying, because I think it's just a scale. I think we all do. But in reality is that I see that time and time again. And people often just need to get a bit of confidence back, Nick. I say to them, you've been promoted or you're doing this job because you are the best at it. You were selected over others. This is a hard fought job. You've worked hard, revel in it. And that's easy to say, but I sort of continue to build up their confidence. That's a big one. Another topic is public speaking. Fear around in any environment, small, large, we all suffer from it. In my presentations, I get anyone who doesn't, get terrified of public speaking, put their hands up. In an audience of 70, you might get 2. We all do it. And I give them techniques to work on around that. You'd be amazed, maybe you won't be, but it builds and builds. And when people have got a presentation or something, it can go for weeks and have really detrimental impact on their well-being. And I give them techniques around that. I talk a lot around working from home. What those that have this working from home dance is continuing, right? We're still finding our way, what's right for the individual and organisations, etc. I think it's sort of recalibrated to somewhere where it's going to stay. But there's a lot of concerns around that. People that haven't coped through COVID, and struggling to get back in, it's still real. What else? Yeah, relationships, difficult people at work, sociopathic bosses, narcissists, someone that they just don't get along with. And again, never underestimate how difficult it is for someone in a workplace when they've got someone there for 12 to 13 hours that they're constantly aware of. It can have really detrimental impact on their well-being. So that's a few of them, but the primary objective is just making sure, that their work-life balance is okay. If it's not, what to do about it, and potholes to look out for to prevent any mental health issues coming up. A lot of it's around prevention.
Yeah, no, all so important, the topics you're talking about. And I think having someone like yourself who has been through these different things, talking about it, talking from experience goes such a long way. Have you seen that have cut through with the companies that you work with because they can really relate to you?
Yeah, so the part of it, a lot of the companies sponsor people to come and see me, and they look at the other part of the business is private coaching, individuals doing it. At the end of the day, I feel that with regard to, can you repeat that question?
I was saying, do you see in the organizations that they relate to what you're talking about because you've been through yourself? You're not just like a, psychologist coming in where they can actually see, okay, this guy's like actually gone through all these things that I'm struggling with.
Yeah, definitely. Sorry, I was off on a different thread. Just being able to relate. It's that idea of sort of being on their level where they know you've got the flesh wounds that they've either had or going to have. The reason I set this up is because, there are something like 5,000 executive coaches in Australia. It's an unregulated business. There are plenty of really good ones. But my differentiating factor was the fact of I've sat in the seat, I've managed teams, I've got the mental health journey, bring it together, and there's going to be no judgment. I've seen it all. It's nothing, I'm not affiliated. I'm totally independent from the workplace. And so by creating that, level of trust or relatability and just being myself, is that both corporates and individuals immediately relate to it. Mm-hmm. Because they say, well, you can be a coach at certain stages where, coaching's all about, I'm working with you, you've got all the answers and I, try and bring them out of you. Or there's a mentoring role where I've got lived experience like that. Walk this way. It's a good way to walk, follow me. There's bringing those two together. And I think that why it can be really powerful, to your point, is that Nick's done it. to a certain extent, he's sat here, he's been dealing with difficult people, he understands the pressure and all that. So it's the key differentiating factor, no doubt.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you how much of a push are companies making in this area of mental health from what you're seeing? And are you seeing that improve?
The change is stark. I mean, I'll give you an example to give you an idea of how the corporate world are realising more and more they've not only got a social responsibility to their staff, but cut to the chase, and that they talk about financials. There's nothing more that's going against them as far as losing in productivity, all that sort of thing. So they've got these two reasons to get it right by doing the right thing by their staff, and also by understanding that they've got shareholders, etc. Right? That's just reality, and they've got to make sure that they're not, coming out on top of this. So there was a survey recently that I read where there were 260 global CEOs that were interviewed around the most pressing things in their day. Harvard conducted this. And on the questionnaire, there was, what are the most pressing issues that you face as a CEO? And number one was, after all the results were in, was attracting talent, keeping talent. And number two was employee wellbeing.
Wow.
Now, that is incredibly pleasing, because I don't think 5 years ago that would have been in the top 10, and 20 years ago it wouldn't have been in the top 100. So the whole environment on this topic is changing. There is huge, unprecedented investment being made by corporates. The change from when, I'm only going back 13, 14 years when I was in the thick of it. I didn't know we had any options. It wasn't their fault. It's just that's the way the world's changed. I didn't know that there was a coach to help me, or that was the world we all lived in. But now, HR and EAP schemes and all these things are helping enormously.
How much would have it helped you 13 years ago if you had a version of yourself coming in at that time?
It's sort of, I look at it in the one way, that was the reason I understood there was an opportunity, because there was no one like me, and I think it would have helped. But the flip side is it might have kept me doing what I was doing and then never getting to my true cause or purpose. And so that was the silver lining in it all, to go through all that. But no doubt, I look back and think, had I had someone that was not attached to all my known worlds, that was not going to judge and was understood, I just think I would have got out a lot quicker probably and got on with my life. But as I say, the silver lining is this.
It's a funny thing in hindsight, looking back on those things. It's similar with my journey. If I look back, I was off the rails, abusing alcohol, had a car crash where almost killed myself and my best friend, and would never do it again. But this chain of events was such a dramatic thing, and it was all in the media, that it led to a drastic change. It led to a drastic change of direction that put me on the path that I've ended up going on, with the mental health work, the entertainment industry and all that sort of thing. And if I hadn't had that big breakdown and had help earlier, I probably wouldn't have been on the path I'm on. So it's that weird thing when you look back on life, you sort of piece it together, but you can't know at the time where things are going to lead.
Yeah, it's this weird tapestry, isn't it? You sort of put all these different pieces together. And I look back and, clearly I'm in such better shape because, around diagnosis and treating, etc. But I can look back and I just know that it sounds kind of crazy, but this was meant to be.
Yeah.
That this was meant to be. And there's so much more to do, but we're just starting, But at least the environment is now one that's accepting, as we were saying before, that makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that message is really important, because we, holding on to regret, a lot of people that have mental health issues are feeling stuck, or they might be just looking back and thinking, I wish I didn't do this. I wish I could turn back time, or whatever it is. We need to look at it that, no, you know what? You did your best at each stage and you are here where you are now. So what can we do moving forward? And it's such a important change in mindset, because we can just stay stuck and become a victim, and it just doesn't lead anywhere.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So are there certain things that you do personally on a daily or weekly basis now to look after your mental and physical health?
Yeah, it's, again, we're all different, but the turning point for me, and I'm quite out, I'm very honest about this, is that getting my medication right was clearly the start. I, like yourself, had seen practitioners for years, even been, given medication when they didn't even know what I was, they were treating. So clearly I was gun shy. But then when I felt that the confidence was there, that change in me was the start, really, of that. So that change in medication was the start for me. And as I said, not going to be the same for everybody, but for me, that was absolutely crucial. Dosage and medication type. That, in isolation, that's clearly not going to do it all, right? We need to actually work on ourselves. But the things for me, my big thing is cold water. And I laugh about the whole Wim Hof thing, and, he's amazing, all this sort of stuff. And I keep saying to people, I've been doing this for 30 years, only because I knew it felt good to get in a cold shower or water. I always said that if I ever was lucky enough to have a swimming pool, I'd swim in it every day through winter. And it's the best thing for me. And I don't want to talk to the science around it, but all I have learned is that it's not possible to be freezing cold and worked up or anxious at the same time. You interchange, you go in and out, even if from microsecond it breaks that cycle. It's the same with pain. That for me is crucial in my day-to-day management. I get a lot of my clients doing it now, and I'm not talking about buying a big ice bath. Just get in the shower for whatever, and it's just a circuit breaker. The other, I do a lot of breathing. I do that daily. 5 minutes, shifting my breath. I didn't understand just how good that was until I really practiced it religiously. And those three are the mainstay. I will add things in, Nick. I will add, there's a lot of, I do a walking meditation routine when I'm up for it, because I can't sit there and meditate. So, and that really works. And there's a stack of other stuff that I do, but they're the main things. And I find them, obviously the meds, they settle things down, but the other stuff that I do daily, they're the main thing. And the other thing, and it's sweating. It's getting on my rower and pounding out. And it's the same concept. You cannot feel physically exhausted and worked up, right? It's not possible. Just to sweat, get all the chemicals moving, but hardcore, not, doing a few bicep curls, but getting in there and really sweating. That's what I find useful.
100%. I couldn't agree more. And I think great examples there. And so, finding whatever works for you, I think, is so important. But I love all the stuff you're saying there. We have 5 closing questions that we finish each episode with. So I'll jump into those in a second. Before I do that, where can our listeners go if they want to learn more about your company and the work you're doing?
Yeah, definitely. The business is equilibriumatwork.com.au. That's the website.
Yep.
All my details are on that. Also, feel free to join me on LinkedIn. I've been fortunate enough in the last year or so doing a lot of group presentations and getting some coverage around that, just around, what I'm up to. So that they're the main 2 ways. At the very least, reach out to me if someone's struggling out there. It doesn't necessarily have to be on a work basis, but if someone just needs to be heard, I'm always here. So that'd be the best way.
Great, and we'll have all the links in the show notes to that. So we'll jump into these closing questions. The first one is, what's your best childhood memory that comes to mind?
I came from a very large family. I come from a very large family, and I'm the youngest. And very, my best memory were family dinners, because why I say that, they were regular and it was compulsory attendance. So we all had to be there, and it was fun. It was safe. They were exciting, combative conversations. We were, given, we were all heard And even though I was the youngest, I certainly wasn't on the front foot very often. But I think that some of my best life training was around that table. And ironically, I'm sitting now, my mum and dad have passed away, but I'm now sitting on the table that we used, all those years ago, which is kind of nice.
Oh, wow.
But that'd be my favorite.
I love that one. What would you say is currently the biggest burden on mental health in society?
Sort of, I think I'm going to steer away from the stigmas, right? Because we sort of covered that and they're pretty obvious. I would say that what I'm learning, and I had experience in this myself, is that what we're dealing with here is clearly an epidemic, right? And unfortunately, the system is so strained that there are not enough practitioners to go around. I find that, a number of my clients that I realize that there are warning signs, to try and, suggest ways to connect them through their GP to practitioners. I hear all the time, I can't get an appointment. It's booked out for 12 months. The ones they recommend it's impossible to get into. And that is a permanent frustration for me, and I'm not sure I'm not sure how it's fixed. What I know is that the first port of call when you're worried about your mental health is you go to your GP, right? And people are like, what do the GP knows? Well, they know a lot because they're doing over 60% of their appointments around well-being. So they're being snowed, right? And they're at breaking point. And then the next step is clearly the psych, and no one can get an appointment, and when they do, it's all about connection, right? How often do you hear that? Don't give up. Well, okay, well, that's well and good, but if they're not there, they're not there. So I think there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes to try and fix that. I'm trying to get involved in that space. But that for me is the biggest burden.
It's a massive one. It really is. That's a big problem, what you're talking about there. What would you say it means to be a man in modern times?
I've got two boys, right? Young boys. And I often think about these sorts of questions, around what I think is important for them. I got six sisters, right? So I grew up in a house where respect was, at the front of the queue from my parents, being respect. Sounds crazy, but standing up, when they walk in a room and walking on the right side of the road and all that sort of thing. And I think that's really important. That to me is as important as anything else. Respect, for everybody, particularly women. And I'm going to use the word, and we use it a lot around vulnerability. I don't care, how tough someone says they are, running back into a pack, in a game of footy or jumping off a cliff. And, that's great. Right. But when it comes to real manliness for me, it's being able to realize that we can be vulnerable and we can stuff up, and it doesn't matter to shed a tear. To me, that's true manlyhood. That's what it means to me to be a man. That's just my own take on it.
I couldn't agree more. I love all the examples you've said there. It's so true. Such a good one.
Man,
what's your personal definition of happiness?
I got married really late, Nick, I became a father for the first time at 47, and then we had 3 kids in a row. So that was, say, something unexpected. So I knew that was bordering on a minor miracle. And so happiness for me is entirely built around spending time with them. And ironically, the greatest joy I get from that is following on. We sit together at dinner every night and try and continue the tradition. But it's now probably at a more junior level because they're only 8, 7, and 5. That idea about, what was good and bad today. And that's as good as it gets for me. That's happiness.
Oh, yeah. There's nothing more important. I love that. So final one, what are you most proud of?
I'm most proud of, selfishly about my business. I'm proud of having a concept or an idea and then building a business around it and creating equilibrium at work. It's entirely different from what I used to do, clearly. But for anyone that's run a business, started a business, the purpose has been providing for my children first by doing something that, I love.
Yeah.
And so to get to that point now where, it's harder on a number of levels, but that for me is, I can't be any prouder of something that I've achieved.
Yeah, I mean, it's an amazing thing, and I think there's so many things to be proud of, and your story's incredible, and I think it's great that you're out there sharing that, doing what you love, helping people. I know that you'll help so many people from this interview, so many of our listeners. So thank you for making the time. Love what you're doing, and thank you for coming on the podcast.
It's an absolute pleasure, and hats off to you for what you're doing. You're allowing this to take place. You're doing some great work, and I've really enjoyed meeting you.
Thank you, Nick Gorman, for joining me today and offering your insights. And thank you for listening. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the episode and any suggestions for topics you'd like to hear about. Feel free to leave a comment or a DM. Your feedback is always appreciated. Please don't forget to click the subscribe button, leave a like or comment, share with your friend, and follow me on Instagram. It really makes a difference. Thank you so much.